Today on the Perception and Action podcast, how do analogy instructions affect movement coordination? Is it better to use a separate analogy for each body part or an integrated one for the whole movement? Plus a preview of the upcoming Skill Acquisition Summit. So it's time for a call to action. Hello, and thanks for joining me. This is Rob Gray from Arizona State University. I've been on a now over 25-year journey as a researcher, professor, and high-performance consultant to understand how we acquire and adapt our perceptual motor skills. Welcome to the Perception and Action podcast, where I discuss how psychological research can be applied to improving performance, accelerating skill acquisition, and designing technologies. If you're a coach or an instructor, my goal is to help you bridge the gap between research and application, and to connect your experiential knowledge with skill acquisition and motor learning theory. I want to help take you from using practice design recipes to becoming a master chef who can manipulate the key ingredients to come up with your own innovative training methods. If you're a student or fellow academic working in the skill acquisition field, I hope to keep you up to date on the latest studies and help you get to know the people working in this area. Finally, if you're developing training technologies, I hope to help you incorporate good motor learning principles in your design, pull out key performance metrics from the data, and design effective studies to evaluate your product. To learn more, help support the podcast, and or work directly with me, please check out perceptionaction.com. Now on to the show. Hi everyone, this is Rob Gray from ASU and the Perception and Action podcast, back with another article review. Today I want to look at the topic of learning by analogy. And this is something I covered way back in episode 16 for the first time. And again, I talked a little bit about some more recent research in episode 146. For those that don't know, learning by analogy is the idea that we can teach movement skills by, instead of giving very explicit instructions about how to move your body, we can convey the movement pattern we're hoping the athlete will achieve through some metaphorical or analogy for the biomechanics. And the classic example that's been used in a lot of research is if you want to teach someone how to do the movement of a basketball free throw, instead of telling them what to do with their elbow and snap their wrist, you tell them, imagine you're reaching up on the shelf and getting a cookie out of a cookie jar, which is why I have the picture there. And there's multiple other ones we can use. You know, Nick Winkelman in his great book, The Language of Coaching, shows you how to develop these and gives lots of great examples. You know, holding a golf club and to get the right pressure, imagine squeezing a tube of toothpaste, and so on. So this is a really, it's been interesting and a kind of shown to be, somewhat controversially, but shown to be an effective tool for coaching. So what I want to look at today is a recent paper that kind of dived into this in more detail, published in the Psychology of Sport and Exercise. And to foreshadow, this is really doing something that I've kind of been pushing for, not only in terms of analogy research, but focus of attention research. That is moving into some of the nitty-gritty details of it, moving beyond the simple contrast between internal, external, analogy, explicit. Let's get into some of the details and figure out why things work and why they don't. And this paper is really an attempt to do that. So the authors note that, the idea of analogy, as I mentioned, is to use a biomechanical metaphor. And the hope is that one of the things it's hoped to achieve is I can take lots of information, right, about what I want your body to do and put it into a simple instruction that's likely to be less cognitively demanding, right? Research has shown that analogy, particularly the work of Rich Masters, has shown that analogy instruction seems to work. After acquisition, learners learning by analogy seem to have the similar performance levels as those learning through explicit instruction. But where the real advantage comes in, and this is what Rich has shown, is that analogy seems to reduce the incidence of choking, right? So when you learn by analogy, you don't have the opportunity for what Rich Masters calls reinvestment, going back to those explicit instructions about what your elbow and your wrist should be doing. So it reduces the chance that you're going to choke under pressure. And he has some research showing that evidence for that effect. But there's also some people that have questioned this research and with valid concerns about it. The effects are kind of, I talked about, are not super strong sometimes. But also there's this kind of confound that Bob and Ricky has raised, other people have raised as well, that a lot of the studies contrasting explicit instruction and analogy have not really done a good job of equating the load of the instruction. And the example is, for example, when in the studies Masters has done on basketball, for shooting a free throw, you get that one instruction about the cookie jar. Well, in the explicit condition, the person gets eight or 10 things they have to remember. So the working memory and cognitive loads and attentional demands are not really equated. And indeed, Bob Rudnicki and colleagues have shown that when you do match those things, you get 4 analogy instructions and 4 explicit rules, you get similar effects, okay? There's also the case that we really haven't dug into anything about what exactly needs to be in the analogy. We just kind of use the same ones, or people, what needs to be there? How many things should we mention? So this paper is trying to address some of these issues, right? So the goal of this present study, what they're going to do is look at 2 different types of analogies. So they're doing this, as I said, getting into the nitty-gritty, what needs to be in a good analogy. And they're going to compare that to explicit instruction. And I'll show you the examples in a second. So the 2 types of analogy instruction are rule-based, what they call rule-based biomedical metaphor. What that means essentially in their study is what they're going to do is give you a separate analogy for each part of the movement, right? So they give an analogy of what you should be doing with your elbow, analogy of what you should be doing with your knees, right? So that's going to be a combination of things. The second type of analogy they're going to call IIM, Information Integrated Biomechanical Metaphor. That's like my cookie jar example. That's why where you try to get the whole movement described in one analogy instead of doing it all separately. And the other really big innovation of this paper is they're going to start looking at joint coordination. Right, as we said, I've emphasized a million times on the podcast, coordinating degrees of freedom is what skill's all about. We haven't really there's some studies that have looked at variability of movement and how that's affected by using analogy versus instruction, but no one's really got into the coordination issues. So that's what they want to achieve. And they basically had 4 hypotheses they want to test, right? The first one comes when you compare the rule-based metaphors versus explicit instruction. Remember, rule-based metaphors, we're going to give you a separate analogy for your elbow movement, your wrist movement, and so on. They're using dart throwing in the study, by the way. So if there's something inherently better about analogies as compared to explicit instructions, when I give you 4 analogies, you should be better than when I give you 4 explicit instructions. So the rule-based should be better than the explicit instruction. The second hypothesis is if there's something special about the integrated one where I try to convey the whole movement in one instruction. Another one of the example of this is some work that Keith Davids has done on tennis. Swing like you're moving like a rainbow, right? So that's another example of an integrated one where you're conveying lots of biomechanical things in one instruction. And if there's something special about that, then that should be even better than the rule-based use of a metaphor. So it's not just the use of an analogy itself, it's combining them. And then they have some predictions related to the coordination. They predicted they would find kind of freezing effects in degrees of freedom. And they also expected to see changes, right? If these analogies are changing your performance, you should see it in your joint coordination. So those are the basic things they're predicting. As I mentioned, they used a dart throwing task. Before the study began, they had a pre-study where they brought in 5 experts they used to generate the instructions, right? And I have them shown here. So the explicit instructions so in the explicit group, there were separate groups, you got 3 rules you had to follow while practicing. Throw the dart by slowly extending the arm, release the dart softly, release the dart diagonally upward direction. So we're giving you explicit prescriptive instruction about how to throw the dart. Compare that with the rule-based metaphor. So this is a type of analogy. So for that, these 3 things, those 3 instructions were replaced by 3 metaphors. So for example, slowly extending your arm was replaced by moving the arm as if you were bowing in a greeting. Release diagonally upward was imagine sliding your arm along the slope of a hill, right? So we're just having the same number of instructions, things we're saying to the participant. In one case, they're explicitly referring to the body movement. In another case, they're a metaphor. And then the third condition was this integrated one. And the instruction there was throw the dart as if you're throwing a crumpled up piece of paper into a waste paper basket located slightly farther away from the dartboard. Right? So we're trying to convey all of those, extending your arms, being soft because it's paper, moving upward because you have to go beyond the dartboard. We're conveying all those things in one instruction, one to the person, one analogy, right? So those are the 3 groups that were compared. They took 45 novices and split them into these 3 groups so that it's a between subjects design. You're throwing from the same distance. In pre and post tests, which were 12 trials each, you were trying to hit the bullseye with every throw. In the acquisition, the training, there was 144 trials. Again, you were trying to hit the bullseye. In the pre and post, obviously, you weren't getting the instructions. They were just, or the analogies. Those were just in the acquisition. And finally, they had a transfer test where after the training, instead of aiming at the bullseye, you had to try to hit different zones on the dartboard. For example, triple 15. So things that were lower and higher with the transfer test, right? So that was the basic design. To do the analysis of coordination, they took the joint angles of the wrist, elbow, and shoulder. They calculated the covariance, essentially the variance. They did a principal components analysis. I'm not going to go into too much depth because they didn't find a ton with that, actually. And then they looked at absolute and variable errors of your shots as performance measures. So absolute error, how far away were you from the bullseye or in the transfer condition, the area where you were learning. Variable, how consistent were you, right? What was the spread around where you hit, right? So those are the basic things. What was found? Well, in terms of performance, right, there weren't enormous effects, right? So there was no difference at all in acquisition, right? So if you look at the blocks, if you look at the absolute errors and variable errors, there was no significant group differences at all. Everyone learned at the same rate. There was a significant effect of block. Obviously, everyone got lower errors as they practiced more. What they did find was the only main really performance effects they found is when they did pairwise comparisons between the pre-test scores and the post-test retention and transfer for each group. So what they found was the absolute errors got significantly smaller after training and significantly better in the transfer condition for the integrated metaphor group. So the one that was given that whole metaphor about the crumpled paper. Neither of the other groups showed significant changes. The variable error was sort of the same. They showed the integrated group showed that the transfer was significantly better, but so did the explicit instruction. So the results are a little bit messy and not really clear in terms of performance. Overall, they're suggestive that the integrated metaphor analogy is the best. Okay, but there's certainly not slam dunk, like everything is that way. The joint coordination kind of supporting the performance effects. The only significant changes in the joint coordination pattern were in the integrated condition. And this, if you see watching me, you can see the graph is showing the coefficient of variation across time. The dashed line is the pretest, and you can see there was changes in the integrated group. None of the other groups had significant changes in the way they were coordinating their movements. So this is kind of supporting of the performance research. So overall, the authors concluded that there seems to be evidence suggesting that this integrated metaphors is better. So it's not just an effect of having the number of instructions. It's not just an effect of reducing cognitive load. It seems like there's something special about combining this all into one metaphor. Okay, it both results in some of these performance changes and in changes in joint kinematics. What are my kind of assessments of the paper? I had a few things I picked out. One, in part of the description of the methods, they described that their transfer test of hitting different parts on the board was also a pressure manipulation. So they said the setting was prepared to purposely trigger psychological pressure because they're throwing to different target positions. No, that's not a pressure manipulation in my book. That's a transfer. You can't have both, right? A transfer is you're just doing something new. Yes, it's going to make it harder, but that's not the type of pressure we talk about when we talk about performance pressure. So I wouldn't consider that a pressure manipulation at all myself. The other things that I would kind of like to see, a pure control group would have helped to interpret the results, I think. Also, I think it would be good, I hate when people try to put too much on you in one study. So I would say, future research to look at those joint coordination changes and assess how functional they are, right? Something like an uncoordinated, uncontrolled manifold analysis to see, is the changes we're seeing actually keeping you more on task? Are you better performance, right? Right now, we saw those integrated ones were better. In the changes occurred only in the integrated group, but we don't know if they were beneficial at all. We don't know what they were doing. But overall, I really like this study because I think it's moving this field in the direction we need to go, right? We need to get into the nitty-gritty of instructional research. We need to stop doing the broad brush comparisons of internal versus external, analogy versus explicit. We've done 1 million of those in every possible task people can think of. It's time to start understanding what about those instructions? What are they doing exactly? How can we change them, right? So I really commend the authors for going in that direction. So that's it for today's article. Thanks for listening. If you wanted to support the podcast, you can go to patreon.com/perceptionaction, where you'll find links to getting written transcripts. And we do a monthly Zoom meeting where we talk about issues related to skill acquisition with all the people in the group. So thanks for joining me. Cheers for now, and keep them coupled. So this is want to do a little preview of the Skill Acquisition Summit for 2021. So we're coming back as a group, and we want to talk. Going to be a little bit different. Some things the same, some exciting new things. So I want to do a little preview. So I'll kick it to Randy Sullivan, who can get us started on the kind of the overview of the meeting.
Okay, so thanks, Rob. We're really excited to do this again. Last year the pandemic kind of squelched it because our friends from the Netherlands were kind of sequestered and we couldn't get here. So. But I'm really excited to be doing this again. And the ideas this year are super exciting. The idea of integrating all disciplines to demystify this thing we call athleticism. The event will occur. It's going to be in Lakeland at the Hilton Garden Inn Lake before on the first day. And we'll be presenting all the theory and the overarching concepts. But the October 23rd and 4th. And if anybody wants to register, I think we have like already 7 or 8 major league teams already signed up, bringing multiple members. And so, FloridaBaseballArmory.com/summit is where you would sign up for it. But it goes from 8 a.m. to about 5:30 p.m. on Saturday with, I guess gatherings and cocktail conversations afterwards. Of course, the best part of the summit, and then on Sunday we're going to go over here to the Armory and do the practical demonstrations, and it's going to be kind of cool because during the Sunday practical presentations, Franz will present an overarching concept, a theme that applies to athleticism for all areas, and then we will individually demonstrate how that applies to hitting, pitching, fielding, base running, etc. And we're excited this year to have, Martijn and Bart and Franz, of course, from previous summits, and you too, Rob, presenting some really good information. And then we're going to welcome Alan Kolb, our strength and conditioning coordinator here at the Armory, and he's going to do a really good job of helping us all integrate how the different disciplines can work together to achieve the development of this thing we call athleticism, which everyone can agree makes for better players and better programs and better teams.
Yeah, I think that sounds really good. I'm a big fan of the breaking down the S&Cs over here and skills over here ideas. I think that's really good. And athleticism, such a loaded word with a lot of people use it, but without much meaning. So I think that's going to be really good. Maybe we'll go, Martijn, can we go to you? Tell us a little bit what you're going to present on this year?
Yeah, I'm going to talk about the constraint-led approach and the role of environment over the task that people give a lot of task cues, and I'm going to look into what the environment can do to get on a deeper level to get better performance, and I'm going to as well show how we integrate this in Amsterdam in our program as a good example of how it can work. We talking to a lot of major league clubs that have a big scale, and it's a lot of times it's hard for them to scale it like we do in Amsterdam. But I think there's a really good lesson to learn on how you can integrate this in a bigger organization.
Yeah, that's cool. Bart, do you want to talk a little bit about what you're...
Yeah, so I think as we're laying the foundation of what athleticism in baseball means, I am going to specify that more to the hitting side. And we will look into a little bit more of the anatomy and motor control of good hitting mechanics, and layer that on top with motor learning principles for the practicals. So some of the topics that I will be talking about is rate of force development in hitting. What are the demands for rate of force development? How does the pelvis play a role in that? What does our lower half, what are the demands of our lower half? A lot of times I think in baseball, we fall into the trap and we say the lower half generates all the power and strength and conditioning. Therefore, we train maximum strength training for the lower half. But is that really so? I'm diving a little bit deeper into that. And also some topics of motor control like phase transitions and endpoints. I want to talk that and translate that to hitting specifically. So don't want to give away too much. We'll talk about that later a little bit, but I think that's it's going to be a really cool translation of theories of motor control and motor learning, and how does that apply to hitting in baseball.
Good. That sounds good. Did they just tease a little. You got to come to see all the good stuff. Franz, what are you gonna
I'll probably will be looking after the theoretical background of what athleticism is. Interestingly, if you look in history, when professional sports developed, early 60s, late 50s, they took a wrong turn at the first junction they came to and started to rely in their idea about athleticism a lot on those niche sports that are the least athletic that you can find, like powerlifting and bodybuilding and weightlifting. And they developed a kind of a terminology and a catalog of ideas that don't hold the water anymore, because there are entities that are not existing. And it's very persistent how that still can be seen everywhere. And I want to try to shoot some holes in there. Obviously, I'll be talking about rate of force development and how little that is linked to what usually is done in gym work and so on. I want to talk about also the negative effects of classic strength training. So try to make a little bit of let's say a background of how we should look at what everybody's been taught for ages now in colleges and universities and so on. And from there on, look at a little bit from a dynamic systems point of view, what are the real constraints in transfers, so that what you do in the gym doesn't stay in the gym, but actually can be surfacing on the baseball field as well.
Well, that sounds really good. Yeah, I think that will. I like the history of it. Taking it to the history, I think, will be really interesting. So for my part, I guess I'll jump. I'm going to talk about perspective control and direct perception, kind of this different way to think about skill. I think it fits well with what we're talking about in particular. We tend to think of skill and performance very asymmetrically. Like athleticism is something you possess. The perspective control idea is more, it's a symmetrical. Athleticism is a relationship you have with your environment in context, right? It's not something you just possess separately. So I'm going to try to introduce the idea of perspective control and with specific baseball examples, and get into this idea of information movement control laws and those kind of things. So I think that's where I'm going to go, but something like that. So hopefully some theoretical foundation for some of these other ideas too. So Randy, and Alan, do you want to talk a little bit about what you guys are going to do?
Sure. Yeah. So I'm going to show how it all applies to pitching. That's sort of our niche, and we've expanded on some great ideas from Franz's two books, Strength and Coordination, Integrated Approach, and The Anatomy of Agility, and kind of dissected those and learned a pretty good process or system to apply them to pitching development. We also work with hitters, but we're going to leave that to Bart, the major league guy, right? But we're going to show how we specifically apply these overarching concepts of athleticism and how we produce them on the mound, how we make them manifest themselves on the mound in each individual's expression of his movement or his skill. Okay. And then Alan will bring it all home for us. And Alan, you're going to be kind of involved in every facet. You're going to be in everybody's business. So go ahead.
Well, I'm really going to touch on a lot of the different attractors and the indicators and how we train them between the back leg, the lead leg, the trunk. I'm going to talk a lot about the pelvis and the hip block, and transitioning from the hinge to the hip block and closing the front door. And then also touching on acceleration and deceleration in the pelvis, talking a lot about the pelvis and the role that it has in athleticism.
Sounds really good. And as Randy mentioned, this is one of my favorite meetings because there's lots of time for great interaction.
Mm-hmm.
My joke is every year I always come home with a sore neck from looking up at pitching coaches. Right? You're also damn tall. I stand there in the bar after the thing and spend the whole night looking up at people, having good conversations. But that happens every year. But yeah, no, I think it's really good. So, and so Randy, it's going to be in kind of a different facility in terms of the practicals.
Yes, the lecture, the theory part will be at the same hotel. We just went over there and organized that. Our production guy Scott has been diligently working on getting all the technology set up there, and we are now in our new temporary home. We're building a new facility about a couple miles away from where we are, and in the interim, we've moved into this spacious industrial park warehouse, and it's kind of nice. It won't be outdoors, so we won't be able to have those rotations that we do, but I think it'll be a neat little twist on it, because instead of going from station to station, hitting, throwing, strengthening, and then my part was the pain management or rehab, one of the problems we have in baseball is those disciplines aren't integrated, and we don't have everybody working under the same umbrella of theoretical concepts and then application of those concepts. And so this is going to allow us in the practical, we'll be all seated in a big arena style thing. We'll have things up. Franz will present an overarching topic, and then the rest of us are going to jump in and kind of 5-ring circus it and go, okay, this is how it applies to hitting, demonstrate. This is how it applies to pitching, demonstrate. This is how it applies to base running. This is how it applies to fielding. And this is how we can integrate strength and coordination, strength and conditioning into all that, so that we get everybody integrated on the same page, and we can once and for all eliminate this confounded siloing that has been such the bane of all coaches and player development specialists. It's been really tough to overcome that siloing, that departmentalization, sort of reductionist approach to everything. And I think it'll do a real good job of demonstrating how we can avoid the siloing, and then how we can also scale it. And it was kind of interesting. We were discussing the format and talking about it. We kind of all came to the conclusion that, we kind of rail against this idea of siloing, yet when we present, we kind of silo, right? Here's my strength guy presenting, and so we're going to try to overcome that. And it'll be a logistical challenge for us to be able to choreograph who's doing what when, but that'll be a fun challenge to overcome. And I think it's going to be a great time, and one of the things I'm really looking forward to is that in the past, during the practicals, I only saw my part, right? Mm-hmm. And I didn't get to go watch everybody else's. And so this is going to be really cool. We're going to see how each of us actually integrate these things. It's going to be a lot of fun.
Yeah. No, I had the same thought when you said that we're going to riff off each other, right?
Right. It's like, it'll be like Franz is big into the blues. I don't know if you know that, but
yeah,
he's going to teach. He'll be the band leader, and we'll be improvising off of him, right?
Yeah. Cool. That sounds really good. Does anyone anything else you want to add in there, Bart?
Oh, Rob, I think the really cool thing here is that we're really going to dive in what athleticism actually means, and especially specific to baseball, because I think there are a lot of interpretations about the term athleticism, and I also what I've noticed myself in the world of baseball is that there's a lot of misconceptions about athleticism. There's a lot of misconceptions about rate of force development, and basically in movement as well. And I think this summit really ties everything down to what is actually needed in baseball to be a successful baseball player, and then what are the theories surrounding that topic, and how can we all tie that together also into practical application. And I think that's the big thing that I'm looking forward to with this summit, is to tie it all together and give an overarching idea of what we think is needed in baseball.
Sounds good. I agree. You hear all these terms, tools, and I think it's really sometimes it's very vague. So it'd be nice to put it together. Yeah.
Yeah. What I found interesting or important in what we're presenting is that we also have to demystify the idea that you have it or you don't have it. Right. Mm-hmm. There's a lot more that can be manufactured than everybody's always perceiving. I mean. Probably in baseball, it's a long living habit to shrug your shoulders or walk away if somebody, doesn't do it right immediately. And that all comes down to not understanding what athleticism is. And much more can be manufactured. Good running can be manufactured. And probably in all other skills in baseball, a lot can be manufactured as well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's a great point, Franz. Baseball is very talent ID. You have it, and you're going to give you a million chances.
Yeah, but it's something you see in all sports, right? You got selection, right, and you got education, and those two almost look like they're antagonistic. Right? People go for selection and then forget about education, and that's something in the future that's not tenable anymore. I mean, it's throwing money away with the buckets.
Yeah.
Yeah, like what Franz is saying is like they're selecting, and when you see how much time we have on hand, and then what we do in Amsterdam, like you have a 2 or 3 year period, and you can change a lot of things and make a lot of people better. I think Randy is doing this with the pitching armory that he has. He shows it year after year, and when you have guys in a professional organization that are in the minor leagues for like 3, 4, 5 years, you actually do have a lot of time to change it instead of just selecting and trying to win every game and see, this guy's good and this guy's not good, and we cannot do anything about it. We really can do a lot about it.
Yeah, I agree. And I think one of the keys is like what you're having a consistent integrated approach across the levels instead of switching, from coach to coach that's doing radically different things. I think that's a good point. So maybe to sum up, Randy. So the dates are. Can you give us the dates and the information again?
Yeah. It's October 23rd and 24th, and I'm really excited. We can all agree. I think everybody in player development will agree that great athletes make great players. Like if you're going to try to develop, it's good to start with a great athlete, and great athletes make great teams and great organizations. Yeah, it's going to be fun to show that the difference between the good athlete and the great athlete, the good performer and the bad and the great performer isn't much, And so we don't have to be in the process of selection and then elimination. We can actually teach this stuff and infuse it into our organizations. And so we're really excited to share this October 23rd and 24th, Skill Acquisition Summit 3, Trey. And it's going to be a lot of fun. And you can sign up. You can register at floridabaseballarmory.com/summit, SUMMIT, or you can call us at our really cool phone number, 866-STRIKE-3, 866-787.
Your picture, that's a cool number.
4533.
I don't know if you want to use that for your hitting department.
We have to get a second line, right?
Yeah.
So, and it's going to be great. And if you have any questions, we can always call Amy. Everyone here in this room knows that she runs the show anyway. Amy's our CFO, COO, my business partner. And so you can call her at that number and she will walk through it. There are group discounts for teams. I think Amy has a deal for like if you bring 6, you get pay for 5 and 3. I don't want to. Is that right?
5th.
Pay for 5 1.
Jump in here and say it real fast. This is Amy, everybody. She's going to say. I was out of my lane. All right. Yeah.
So for our team discount, if you purchase 5 tickets, the 6th is free.
There you go. Call her. All right. 866-STRIKE-3. There you go.
Yeah, and I should emphasize, like the previous meetings, we get people from all levels too, right?
Yep. Absolutely.
Major league, college, softball sometimes too.
Yeah, like think about okay, name me a sport where athleticism is important.
Yeah.
Right?
Sure.
I mean, everybody. We have people calling us, cricket coaches calling us. We have basketball coaches calling us. We have football teams calling us. We worked with several NFL teams about how to create this thing. So it's been pretty cool. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think also in last years we've seen strength and conditioning coaches, we've seen athletic trainers, we've seen physiotherapists that all came to the summit and had really good conversations and took a lot away from it. So it's not just baseball, hitting or pitching. I think it's the general everybody that works in athletics that has an interest in motor control, motor learning, skill acquisition, strength and conditioning, you name it. I think we have something to offer for everybody.
Yeah,
really good point.
Yeah. Okay, well, I hope we sold it well to you, people who are watching and listening, and we see you there. I think it's a really good meeting. I was really enjoy it, so I hope we'll see you there.
All right.
Thanks, guys. Okay, that's it for today's episode. Remember, you can contact me at robgray@asu.edu or follow me on Twitter at ShakyWeights. To find out more about the podcast, please check out perceptionaction.com. Finally, to support the podcast and receive bonus materials, including written transcripts, please head over to patreon.com/perceptionaction. This is Rob Gray from ASU. Cheers for now, and keep them coupled.